Right. So we are going to discuss about two different things today. One is about microservices part, and second is for API. Okay. Let us understand microservices from a broader level, wherein we need to understand about monolithic approach. Because I'll give you an example, a generalized example I'm going to provide you so that you will be understood about the basic understanding over or monolithic services versus microservices. Let's say earlier in the beginning days, whenever an application we are developing, or else let's say, for example, if you have taken any vehicle, let's say that you are taking a truck, right? So I'm just giving a generalized example so that people can understand well, right? So you can understand well. Let's say, for example, we are using a truck. So truck is meant for goods to transport from one location to another location. Now, if you see, if there are any modifications we want to make, right? Something got damaged. Let's say, for example, glass got damaged of the truck, or else of any other external component what we see. So what generally we have to do, because whatever the components you see, especially in reference to the truck itself is concerned, were interconnected. Am I right or not? These were all interconnected.
Yes.
As it was interconnected, all these, so whatever the damage happened for a particular object or a component, it will directly impacting on the other components also. Sometimes there is a possibility. So if you want to change a particular component in the existing vehicle, so wherein overall structure of the vehicle got affected due to the changes what is that we are making, because these are all something assembled in a one flow, in a single, I can say in a single way, in a single way of approach, the complete vehicle is being constructed. So if there are any component changes to be made in the existing vehicle, where there are difficulties, where we have to consider the other components which are something connecting to the particular vehicle itself. At the same time, whatever the necessary changes and all everything will also be impacted on the other area. Am I right or not? Aishwarya, right?
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So this is what generally an approach which normally we call it as monolithic approach, right? So when we talk about monolithic approach here, you can see, right? So this is where generally the differences you can see, right? So the first one is about monolithic approach you can see here in the left hand side. Whereas in the right hand side, it's a microservices approach. Now, in reference to the micro monolithic approach, whatever the build of a layer, because normally when we see an application will be categorized into three different layers. You know that, right? So any application will be having three different layers. The first layer is called presentation layer, right? So presentation layer, and whatever are we presenting on screen, either we are using HTML, right? So DHTML, or else we are using PHP, right? So different tools, irrespective of tools. I am not presenting the tools here. So whatever the tools are we going to use, whatever are we presenting on screen, so that the user interfaces where people can enter the detailed information through this. This is where generally we call it as presentation layers transfer. Now, the second layer is called business or logic layer. Normally we call it as, means whatever the logic we need to write, whatever the application we are developing. So whatever the logic we develop for an application to perform effective. Okay. So to perform effective, business or logic layer is required. So this business or logic layer majorly confined completely relating to the middleware area, where how and what generally this business logic layer we have implemented. This is where generally the second layer stands for. The third layer is called data layer, whatever the data tables are we creating, whatever the data storage we develop, at the same time, whatever the data elements we were transforming to the existing application to the presentation layer, or else if you want to extract any data, right? So for example, if you want to visualize the data using different tools like Power BI, Tableau, right? So or else if you want to extract any reports by which was already, right? So data was already there, where if you want to extract any information for that, uh, writing some SQL queries, right? So all these things are considered and combined in under the data layer. Okay, so three different layers we have. Any application, we have three layers. One is presentation layer. Second is called as business or logic layer. The third layer is called data layer, right? So these are the three different layers will be there for any application. Now, when we talk about this monolithic approach, whatever the layers are we discussing now, either it can be presentation, business or logic or data layer, everything were interconnected. If there are any damage or if there are any changes to be made to this existing application would be such a difficult task, because when we are developing an architecture of any project, the architecture must be in such a way, it should be strong enough to deal with. At the same time, it should have that flexibility to make necessary changes when and wherever it is needed. Because earlier, if you see, especially from the context of the requirements which customer used to provide earlier were very standard. You know that. Means I'm talking about the beginning days, not recent.
Yes.
So beginning days, the requirements what customer used to provide and whatever the solutions are we providing usually of something, I don't say it's static, but it is standard. I don't say you, I don't use called static, but it is standard on its size. So there won't be any changes in the existing structure or the services or the solutions we are providing earlier. But nowadays, the situation has changed in such a way. This is where generally nowadays we are using DevOps environment and agile approach, right? So you know, because being a working professional, you know about how important nowadays we are moving towards agile and DevOps, right? So we know that. Why? Because there are some dynamic changes in solutions we want to provide. This is what and how usually nowadays we are expecting, right? So we want to make some changes in the existing application when and wherever it is needed. And whatever the components, whatever the requirements we want to update, everything has to be updated within the specific time limits. That's how generally the situation has been drawn. Because nowadays, if you see, when we are developing a solution, parallelly we are working with the customer. Business is running their business activities, and whatever the technical support required for a customer to be delivered within hours or days. So we have to do it in day basis, or it can be hourly, daily, or weekly basis. We have to execute. That's how the situation has been changed. So whenever we are developing an architecture, so the architectures should be in such a way, it should be strong enough. At the same time, that architecture should have a flexibility to make multiple changes when and wherever it is needed. The reason why nowadays we are moving towards microservices, where in this microservices, whatever the changes we want to make for a particular component, if you want to make any changes on a particular component, changes can be made on a particular component. At the same time, whatever the impacts which are something interconnected with the components will be reduced, because I don't say it is 100% zero, but complexity in terms of the changes to be made to the existing application will be reduced when we are following the microservices approach. Because earlier monolithic approach, of course, that is something useful and it was effective earlier days. But nowadays the situation was different, right? So because the situation has changed nowadays, let's say that the lot of examples you can see, right? So Netflix, right? So in digital media, I'm giving you an example, right? So Netflix, Amazon, right? So different apps nowadays came, right? So whenever these applications require some dynamic changes to be made, depends on the need of the interest of the viewers. So earlier there was a standard content. Earlier there was a standard content which people used to produce. But now the content as well as the viewership depends on the whatever the content are we going to deliver through these depends on the viewership and as well as the perception as well as the interest of the customers, what people who are subscribed for. So in the same manner, whenever we are working on the applications, as in when the changes were happening very frequent, we are making regular changes on the existing application, which we demands, which we are expecting over a period of time. Hence, it is always important for us to make those changes as in the from the component level without getting affected with the other components. Because if it is getting affected with other components, the complexity of the application will be reduced, will be increased more. The amount of time we are going to spend to reduce those will also be more, cost more, right? So everything will be more. So that's the reason why transformation from a monolithic approach to the microservices we are changing because complexity of developing an architecture in terms of the complexity of understanding will be reduced here due to the microservices part. At the same time, whatever the changes to be made to the existing application or the solution we are going to develop will be much easier. So this is where and how generally the difference we see from monolithic to microservices. Is it clear to you? Uh, uh, Aishwarya, is it
Yes. Yeah.
understood? Right. So
Yes.
this is what generally
Yes.
the difference is. Now, coming to the agenda point, right? That's what we are going to discuss because in sessions we are going to discuss about introduction about the microservices. Again, I'm repeating you. It's always better. I'll start from the basics because anyway you have undergone the training over the microservices and all everything from the basic level, and you're expecting some advanced level. But let me initiate from the because hardly takes 1 or 2 days time for us to cover all that, right? So it won't be taken more
Yeah,
time,
that's fine. Yeah.
right? So because let's understand about the basic principles. If you have any apprehensions over the understanding level, so that please do let me know. So after that we'll go to the next level, right? So this is the point. So microservices introduction principles is what we are going to discuss initially to it. Next, I am going to discuss about the differences among three different things. One is about monolithic part, followed by service-oriented architecture and microservices. Of course, whatever the explanation I have given you, a generalized explanation I have given, but let us take some case and I'll explain to you so that you'll be understood this much better, right? So when we are trying to understand about this approaches of monolithic approach in context to service oriented architecture or microservices, that differences we are going to discuss it, right? Because of course now the environment was completely changed into the microservices area. Many solutions we are working on microservices, but we never know, right? So because there will be some old legacy projects which were used this service oriented architecture and monolithic as well, right? So we never know that. So because when there is an opportunity we come across before to study about service oriented architecture or monolithic, it is always important for us to understand the difference among these so that it is easy for you to convert your services to the microservices point of view. So that's what generally the my context of understanding, the reason why I have mentioned this point. Next, architectural advantages and disadvantages. Anyway, this we have already discussing in the solution architect part, right? So there anyway I'm covering over that. What are the different architectures we have, right? So already discussed in solution architecture training. I think you have undergone that, right? So what are the different architectures do we have? So that I'm not covering that here because anyway you know it. Next is about what are the different tools as well as the deployment and orchestration. What is that we follow? So this is in context to the different tools followed by the deployment policies and procedures because when we are going to deploy this, there is a procedure standards which we have to be followed. So the deployment procedure steps are required because sometimes we in the development senior level, depends on the senior level, we might require to involve in the deployment, because in the olden days, if you see, the deployment used to be taken care of by the people who are as separate. Deployment professionals will be as separate earlier. But nowadays, the situation has changed in such a way where the deployment we need to be involved with. Of course, for deployment and all, of course, we are using tools and all. That's a different thing. But for the releases, no, followed by it. So we need to know about what are the different tools, deployments, and as well as orchestrations we need to know. At the same time, we need to discuss exclusively about this factors app, which is required, especially in our curriculum. Next, about the microservices patterns and communications. What are the different microservices patterns do we have nowadays? What are the different patterns we have, right? So how these microservices were communicating one among all. So these are all which I'm going to cover in reference to the microservices part. This is point number one. Now, second, when we talk about APIs, we need to understand about APIs because developing APIs is something common for any application, right? So because if you want to develop any communication between uh, two different applications, right? So there is some API which we have to write, right? So because either we want to edit the data, right? So or else if we want to get the data from different APIs, right? So different system applications. So access among two different applications which has to be developed. So for that, generally APIs is what generally we develop. So we need to write APIs. So that API integration is more important. Application programming interface integration is more important. So for that, generally for APIs, normally we use two different APIs. One is about RESTful and second is SOAP, Simple Object Access Protocol. We call it as, right? So some because earlier nowadays we are using very less, but earlier if you see there is a concept of web services. You know that, right? In that web services, we used to have a concept called SOAP, UDDI, WSDL, all that. Universal description, descriptory language, right? So all these things earlier was, of course, nowadays we are not using all that, right? So UDDI, WSDL were becoming, outdated ones, old ones. But in context to the web services, yes, we are using SOAP APIs. Few organizations were using SOAP APIs, all that. At the same time, few organizations are going to a RESTful API also. So two things are there, right? So when it context to the SOAP API here, let me show you. Just give me a second. So yeah, SOAP UIs with SOAP UIs are there, of course. My focus is on RESTful API, not on SOAP, because RESTful API is what we are using more now. So my focus is completely into RESTful APIs now, not on the SOAP level. But for an understanding level, I'm just showing you this, right? So this is where generally this API integrations, right? So whatever the integration purposes as well as the types, whatever we need to use, what are the different types of APIs, which starts from the basic from API context, which I'm going to start. At the same time, how these integrations will be taken place practically. This API integration, learning this API integration is essentially required. So that is where generally we were learning. So followed by this, I'm going to discuss about RESTful API and what are the different components we use in it. Right. So this is about SOAP. Aishwarya, are you there?
Yes, yes, I can
Aishwarya,
see
are you
this.
there?
Yeah, yeah. Yes, yes. Am I audible?
Yes. Right. So this is about SOAP UI, right? So SOAP UI user interfaces and all everything, right? So whatever are we working on, that is Apache. This is about Apache Kafka, which you have discussed some time back, right? So when we are working on. So these APIs
Yeah.
properties followed by the kind of components, what is that are we going to use? At the same time, how this RESTful API we need to integrate so that either we want to read the data, right? So or else if you want to if you want to edit, right? So whatever required, right? So all these things can be done using this RESTful. So that is also I'm going to discuss. So this is an overall understanding over the agenda. What is that I'm going to cover uh, from now onwards, which will be for next 3 weeks. But I suggest you to spare one more week. Let's put 4 weeks time. So that slowly I go
Yeah.
slowly, right? So if you require me to make it faster, I do it. So otherwise, my always suggestion for you to, for anyone, whoever learning API microservices slowly. So my suggestion is to keep 4 weeks time with you so that I'll cover you both API microservices, API and as well as microservices also. Is it clear to you, Aishwarya?
Yes.
Do you have any questions? Please go ahead.
No, it's okay. We can carry on like as you suggest.
Right. So this I'm going to continue from tomorrow onwards. We'll start with microservices principles first. So first I'll cover microservices to you, Aishwarya. After that I'll go for API. Okay, is it fine to you? Which one is better?
Yeah,
If you're
that's
interested.
fine. Yeah.
So you're fine with microservices first, then API. Am I right? Clear.
Yeah, but I mean those things which are like very basic, we can I
Skip.
mean do a
You
little
do you want
fast.
me to
Like
skip
yeah,
those principles, all that? Do you want me
yeah,
to
yeah,
skip?
yeah. That will be fine. Yeah.
Okay, then I'll start from the differences then, right? So how different monolithic SOA and microservices. Do you want me
Yeah,
to
yeah.
start
That will
from
be
there?
fine. Yeah, 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 yeah. Sure, that will be
Because
fine.
microservices principles and all everything, I hope you have learned already, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah.
don't think that is much required nowadays to you to learn, right?
Mm. Yeah.
Am I right or not? Yes.
Yeah. Yes.
Right. So I'm going to discuss about this from tomorrow onwards. Tomorrow onwards, I'll continue. This will be at 10:15. So can you come down sometime by yeah, 10:15 is fine. Yeah, 10:15 is fine.
Yeah, yeah.
10:15 to
Definitely.
11:15. 1 hour
Yeah.
session. It will be clear,
Yeah. I
Aishwarya?
have one thing to inform you. Yes.
Sorry?
Maybe next